of Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Awoken. The people of Eorzea have recently escaped the threat of an invasion by the forces of the Garlean Empire, at least temporarily. Legatus Gaius Van Baelzar, assisted and manipulated by a mysterious group known as the Ascians, managed to restore an ancient war machine, the Ultima weapon, capable of consuming primals to enhance its own power. Gaius planned on using this to conquer Eorzea, while the Ascians wished to use it to trigger a calamity in an effort to resurrect their god, Zodiark. They likely would have been successful in these goals, had it not been for a select group of heroes, namely the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, along with genius inventor Sid Garland, and most importantly, the chosen warrior of the deity Hydaelyn, Explora Syrieza. Together, they managed to destroy the Ultima weapon, stopping both Gaius and the Ascians. Praise and thanks are heaped onto Explora and the Scions, as Eorzea enters into an age of peace and prosperity. But there's no rest for the wicked, and evil continues to lurk in shadowy corners. We catch up with Explora some time later, as she enjoys a much-deserved break. Duty calls before long, however, and she's summoned back to the Waking Sands, where she meets with Minfilia, lost in thought. She's told that ever since their victory over the Garleans, they've been receiving a great deal of attention from the rest of the world, in stark contrast to their past days of secrecy. They are now besieged by benefactors, but every promise of patronage comes with a price, and Minfilia has been steadfast in refusing those that wish to buy their services. When they formed the Scions, it was with the goal of serving Eorzea, not the interests of individual Eorzeans, and yet she can't help but wonder if accepting these riches could empower their organization to do more good. She asks Explora to speak with the other major members of the Scions for their opinions, so Explora does so. She finds that Y'shtola is fully committed to the group remaining neutral, otherwise it could bend their responsibilities. Thancred is a bit more nebulous in his feelings, remarking that a number of people believe that the Scions could assist in liberating the city-state of Alamigo, but he believes that every path is paved with good intentions, while where they lead is far from clear. Ida comments on how many gifts she's been getting lately, although Papalymo is making her send them back, while Papalymo is sure that they would benefit from more financial support, but not if it comes at the cost of their principles. Urianger, ever cryptic, implies that the beast tribes will return, stronger and bolder, and it's a pity that the Scions are so few and without funds. Finally, Explora speaks with Alphinaud, who has given the situation a great deal of thought. He heads in to speak with Minfilia, immediately telling her that the Scions must leave Ul'dah, specifically because of the Syndicate, the wealthiest members of Ul'dah that hold most of the power in the city-state. Alphinaud claims that the Syndicate will never allow the Scions to remain independent now that they've seen their capabilities, so they will put pressure on them until they cooperate, such as denying the Waking Sands and Aetheryte. The appearance of neutrality is as important as being neutral, so they need a location that fits that principle. He recommends Revenant's Toll in Mordona, due to it being neutral territory, contains all of the essential facilities they require, and is frequented by a great number of adventurers to supplement their ranks. Minfilia is not as keen on the idea, however, stating that Ul'dah is their home, and they have invaluable ties to this community that have been forged over years of effort. She dismisses Alphinaud, but she continues to ponder if it's the right course of action. Explora goes to speak with Alphinaud, who's upset with Minfilia's hesitation, and explains that her adoptive mother, Philomene, perished during the calamity years ago. She was known as the Songstress of Ul'dah, and her passing caused a great deal of grief among her followers, many of whom refused to believe it, which was only fueled by the fact that her body was never located. Minfilia eventually accepted that her mother was gone, but recently, for some reason, rumors have begun to circulate that Philomene is alive and well. A woman matching her description has been seen near the resort of Costa del Sol, so Alphino and Explora head out to see if they can confirm or deny the rumors. Arriving at the resort, they speak with Gegaruju, the owner, who is shocked to learn that the woman who was here was apparently the songstress of Ul'dah, and claims that, had he known, he would have chained her to his bedpost and never let her leave. According to him, she said that she was heading west, so Explora heads over to the nearby settlement of Wineport to ask around. The chief there remarks that they did receive a customer matching that description, calling her a delight to behold, but says that her perfume was so ghastly that they had to eject her from the premises to avoid interference breach of contract, which is what we're reading now. I wonder how this one will end up. We're provided a document from the desk of Dr. Dougal Deering, in which he discusses what waste is. It reads, "What is waste? The dictionary defines, well, nothing, actually. We define. The dictionary only records our definitions. Murphy managed to take out a hostile typewriter that could rewrite any physical document within its immediate vicinity, as well as apparently change people's thoughts. Now, Murphy is back, in his biggest and most dangerous adventure yet. Let's begin. The article begins with a call log between a member of Site 19's documentation department, Robinson, and the new site director, O'Leary. Robinson calls to congratulate O'Leary on his promotion, saying that the department here is rooting for him, and he can't be any more of a pain than Director August. O'Leary thanks him and says that settling in has been a mess, especially with the power outage yesterday. Apparently, the security footage for the entire day yesterday, the 6th, is gone, although Robinson thought that today was the 6th, chalking it up to having one too many drinks last night. The other thing Robinson wanted to talk about was a new SCP that came in out of the investigation department, slot 7043. O'Leary is surprised that that slot wasn't already filled, but Robinson says that he thinks something was there and it just got moved. He finished the description for it and was about to scan the single addendum document when he looked over and noticed the page had just filled itself in with addendums. O'Leary takes this to mean that he used an AI to do it, but Robinson says that he wasn't using an AI because he hates them. He ran the addendums through the search, and there were a few things in there above his clearance level, but he doesn't know what to make of them. He proceeded to cut them out so he could finish, but he kept them in a separate document just in case. O'Leary asks to confirm that they just appeared there, to which Robinson says that they did, out of thin air. He didn't really look over them in case there's a brain hazard or something, but from the couple of glances he took, he didn't recognize the formatting. This piques O'Leary's interest, so he asks Robinson to send them over so he can run them through the folks in InfoHazards before looking at them. Robinson asks if he wants them emailed or faxed over, causing O'Leary to chuckle, as the documentation department is the only place that still has a fax machine. Mankind in the Warhammer 40k universe is different than many futuristic empires in a lot of different ways, but one key difference is in their focus on religion. Soldiers scream oaths to the god emperor as they charge into battle. Tech priests recite prayers and rituals while working on machinery, and heresy is hunted down and purged wherever it might be found. While an imperial guardsman believes in and fights for the god emperor, and the Astartes mostly worship the emperor as a great and gifted man, there exists another fighting force within the Imperium that takes faith to the next level. They are the Adepta Sororitas, or the Sisters of Battle, and they wage war with righteous fervor and fury, serving the Imperial Church as their soldiers of God. While they're sometimes referred to as just nuns with guns, the Sororitas serves a myriad of important functions across the Imperium, and have served loyally for thousands of years. Let's take a look at their organization, how they function both in battle and outside of it, and how their faith empowers their deeds. Let's start with the history of the Sororitas, which means that we first must take a look at the Ecclesiarchy. The Ecclesiarchy, or the Adeptus Ministorum, is the imperial church, which was set up in the wake of the Horus Heresy as more and more members of the Imperium adopted faith in the Emperor as a deity. It was set up as a separate entity than the Adeptus Administratum, the administrative and bureaucratic division of the Imperium, with the head of the church being one of the High Lords of Terra, the governing body of the Imperium. Early on, this led to a power struggle between the Ecclesiarchy and the Administratum, as people believed that the church was speaking for the Emperor, and they began to enact legal changes and deploy the military in various engagements. With the church potentially becoming the dominant power of the Imperium, an internal war began to rein them in, during a period called the Age of Apostasy. The Ecclesiarchy moved off of Terra during this time, forming their own armies and naval fleets, and enacted massive tithes to pay for more and more elaborate palaces and temples. Uprisings and rebellions became common, with the Ecclesiarchy executing anyone and everyone they declared to be heretics. This period could be summarized in its own video, so to be brief, a man named Vandir became both the master of the Administratum and the Ecclesiarchy, escalating the Age of Apostasy through his insanity until he was eventually killed and things calmed down once again. During this time, there was an all-female warrior cult known as the Daughters of the Emperor, who remained an isolated sect devoted to the Emperor and warrior training, until Vandir's spies discovered them. He proceeded to recruit them into his own private army, using a protective amulet known as a Rosarius to trick them into believing that he was blessed by the Emperor, and renamed them the Brides of the Emperor. Later on, the leader of the Brides learned of Vandir's treachery, thanks to the Custodes taking her before the Emperor himself, although the details of that meeting are unknown. The Brides reverted to being called the Daughters of the Emperor, and the leader personally executed Vandir. Afterwards, the newly appointed Ecclesiarch proclaimed the Decree Passive, which intended to severely limit the church's capacity for warfare. Their military was disbanded entirely, as the decree specifically prohibited the Ecclesiarchy from maintaining men under arms. Of course, the Daughters of the Emperor were not men, and the Ecclesiarch recognized the value of having some warriors under their command, so he utilized this loophole to bring the daughters into the church, renaming them the Adepta Sororitas. The Sororitas are divided into a number of different orders, with there being orders militant, the actual fighting force of the organization, and the non-militant orders, who fulfill various duties outside of direct combat. The militant orders are what is technically known as the Sisters of Battle, although this moniker is often used for the entire organization. These orders are also all divided amongst two separate convents, the Convent Prioris, based out of Terra, and the Convent Sanctorum, based out of Ophelia 7, the planet that the Ecclesiarchy temporarily moved to during the Age of Apostasy. There are 6 major orders of the militant Sisters of Battle, each with slightly different doctrine and methods, somewhat akin to the various Space Marine chapters. They are the Order of the Bloody Rose, the Order of Our Martyred Lady, the Order of the Valorous Heart, the Order of the Sacred Rose, the Order of the Ebon Chalice, and the Order of the Argent Shroud. In addition, there are also countless lesser orders militant that have developed over time after being separated from their larger orders, although they still answer to their major order. The Sisters of Battle all follow orders as directed by the ecclesiarchy, whether that be participating on the front lines of wars or protecting various church buildings, property, and relics. Another major responsibility that they carry is being one of the dedicated Chamber Militant, or military branches, of the Imperial Inquisition. Specifically, they can be called upon for military purposes by the Ordo Hereticus, the branch of the Inquisition focused on rooting out internal threats, such as treason, mutation, heresy, and witches, due to the strong faith of the Sisters, and due to the fact that the Ordo Hereticus was partly formed as a checks and balances system against the ecclesiarchy in the wake of the Age of Apostasy. Although their methods differ, the Ordo Hereticus and the Sisters of Battle are both dedicated to purging all heresy from the Imperium and to ensure the stability of the one true faith. There are a number of non-militant orders of the Sororitas that serve a variety of purposes, but there are just a few major ones. The orders Hospitaller are sisters functioning as surgeons, physicians, and nurses in both military operations and civilian areas, as well as being called upon by the Inquisition for either support in battle or, in some rare cases, assisting with torture. While the Imperial Guard has medics and chirurgeons, Sisters of the Order Hospitaller are some of the finest trained medical personnel in the Imperium. The Order's Dialogus are sisters devoted to studying languages and dialects, being some of the most learned people amidst the ecclesiarchy. They often assist the Inquisition when heading into places that speak new or unusual dialects, and will also assist the ecclesiarchy in any translation duties after a world has been conquered. Generally, though, they keep to themselves, cloistered away in libraries and shrines, as the Church finds it risky to let sisters who have access to sacred and secret information out into the open. The Order's Famulus, on the other hand, consists of diplomats, advisors, and chamberlains who are sent out across the Imperium to broker alliances, trade deals, marriages, negotiations, and other delicate social work. They work closely with the most powerful individuals within the Imperium, counseling arrangements that can affect billions of lives. In addition to this, they also work secretly as spies for the ecclesiarchy, closely observing influential individuals to keep an eye for any actions that go against the Church and the Imperium. A powerful family that has ruled for generations may be easily eradicated at the word of a sister if they happen to step over the line. Other smaller orders of sisters might be in charge of missionary work to newly discovered primitive worlds, or the handling of artifacts for the Church, or providing choirs in temples, or even maintaining the glass paneling in shrines and cathedrals. Imperial society is heavily focused around the Church, and so the Adepta Sororitas can be involved in any aspect of that, all while maintaining a constant vigilance for any heresy that needs to be uprooted. Of course, when most people think of the Adepta Sororitas, they think of the Sisters of Battle, so let's go over a bit more in detail how they operate. Unlike the Space Marines, which are divided somewhat strictly into hundreds of different chapters consisting of around 1,000 Marines each, the 6 militant orders of the Sororitas consist of tens of thousands of battle sisters each. It's rare for multiple orders to be involved in the same conflict, outside of certain massive military operations, and each order is further divided up into preceptories, consisting of up to 1,000 sisters, and commanderies, consisting of up to 200 sisters. Additionally, each order is led by a canoness, each of the 2 convents is led by a prioress, and finally, the entire organization is led by the abbess of the Adeptus Sororitas, who leads both the militant and non-militant orders. The Sisters of Battle are all entirely human, lacking any of the superhuman augmentations of the Space Marines. While they will never quite reach the heights of combat prowess compared to the Astartes, they are often superior to any standard Imperial soldiers thanks to training, equipment, and faith. Nearly all Sisters of Battle are equipped with a suit of Adepta Sororitas power armor, which were initially commissioned for the Brides of the Emperor by Vandir. These suits of armor are crafted on Mars, and are light, durable, and provide increased strength to the wearer by linking the sisters' musculature directly to the enhanced fiber bundle network of the armor. All of the rest of their equipment is supplied by the Adeptus Mechanicus, and is first taken to the convents on Terra or Ophelia 7 to be blessed and anointed. Weapons are daubed in sacred oils and polished by cloths that have been touched by saints. Bolts and chainsword teeth are inscribed with verses, and specialty war gear wielded by canonesses are sprinkled with the blood of martyrs. Most of the time, Sisters of Battle wield the holy trinity of weapons, being the bolter, the flamer, and the melta, along with chain swords and bolt pistols. Vehicle-wise, they'll utilize the Rhino and Immolator as armored personnel carriers, and a missile tank called the Exorcist to provide long-range fire support. They will also utilize a unique combat walker known as a Penitent Engine, which is actually used as both a frontline weapon as well as a punishment for heretics. The heretic is hardwired to the front of the walker, completely exposed to enemy attack, and is essentially reliant on luck or the Emperor's judgment to keep them safe. They are provided numerous drugs to ensure that they survive multiple injuries while not numbing any of the pain, and the walker is generally exclusively equipped with close-range weaponry, such as power saws, chain fists, and flamers. This is a punishment for the most terrible of crimes against the Imperium, when exile or execution is deemed too lenient, but it certainly presents a striking image on the battlefield. Unlike the Imperial military, which is divided between the Guard and the Navy, the Sororitas utilize their own warships, including the Retribution-class battleship, the Dauntless-class cruiser, and the Piety-class cruiser. The flagship of the Abbess of the Sororitas is a battleship known as the Martyr's Halo. Faith is just as much a weapon for the Sisters of Battle as a bolter is. While belief in the God Emperor is a central aspect of practically all fighting forces across the Imperium, the Sisters take this to a higher level, often empowered by their faith. Force of will is very much a tangible concept in the 40k universe, thanks to the Immaterium, and much like how Chaos gods empowered their servants, it's believed by some that the God Emperor does the same. Regardless of the exact mechanisms, there have been quite a number of examples of Sisters of Battle performing what can only be described as miracles. These miracles range from being able to spontaneously heal wounds to being resurrected entirely, although they often only manifest in times of dire need, and in some cases only to rare individuals. Those of the most devout faith and who display the most incredible of miraculous abilities will likely be declared a living saint, said to be blessed and empowered by the Emperor to carry out his will. The difference between a living saint and a potent psyker is perhaps not as great as some would like to admit, but they undoubtedly are extremely valuable, rare, and loyal members of the Imperium, often coming from the ranks of the Sisters of Battle. On the flip side, there are times when sisters fall from the Emperor's grace, breaking their faith or failing in their duty in some way. There are examples of members of the Sororitas falling to chaos, although this is often only a temporary form of control, and the sisters will generally end their own lives after regaining control. One notable example of this not occurring is with Muriel Sabathiel, a sister superior that willingly turned to chaos, becoming a chaos champion of Slaanesh. If a sister fails in her duties and wishes to atone for her failures, however, she will likely become a Sister Repentia. These individuals are not part of any official order, but instead are led into battle by a Mistress of Repentance. They are stripped of their power armor and often given a weapon known as an Eviscerator, a large double-handed chain weapon. They are taken onto the front lines of conflicts to fanatically atone for their sins in the hopes that they can fulfill their oath of repentance. They will never be allowed to rejoin their sisters in an order, and their oath will only be completed through death, but they fight to ensure that it is fulfilled by that time, through service to the Imperium. Though they are outcasts, they are looked upon by the Sisters of Battle with awe and respect, as they are often the most fierce and formidable warriors in the Sororitas. Although out of universe, the Sisters of Battle were added as another Imperial faction to function as an alternative to the all-male Space Marines, the Sororitas would take many years to be treated fairly by the lore. They were often sidelined or brushed aside by the much more popular Astartes, with a very notable example involving a squad of Grey Knights killing an entire group of sisters in order to bless their own weapons to win a battle against a demon of Khorne. Over time, likely due to the Sisters of Battle rising in popularity, they have been treated more fairly, and are now a respected aspect of the Imperial fighting forces. Time will tell how far their development will go, as far as being warriors empowered by faith to the point of performing miracles, but either way, their capabilities in war and outside of it stand for themselves. They might just be nuns with guns, but in the 40k universe, that's certainly enough of a threat. An overview of the Primarchs. The Imperium of Mankind is a faction containing quadrillions upon quadrillions of people, meaning that only an infinitesimally small percentage of them are going to stand out in the history books. Sometimes these standout figures are normal humans, such as in the grim darkness of the far future. The Eldar. It's often pretty easy to see the influence of fantasy on Warhammer 40k, especially since it was created as a spin-off of Warhammer Fantasy. Humans versus orcs is a pretty standard fantasy trope that is also present in 40k, but another race that was brought over to some degree are the elves, in the form of the Eldar. In fact, with the works of Tolkien being such an influence, the term Eldar was one of the names applied to elves in Middle-earth, meaning people of the stars. Armaments of the Orcs. The Orcs are a bit of an outlier in the 40k universe that really helps to make the setting feel a bit more unique compared to standard grimdark sci-fi. They're not boring humans, or ravenous aliens, or dark forces of chaos, but rather they're a strange, fungal species that speak in Cockney accents and absolutely love nothing more than to drive fast and shoot everything in sight. Orcs possess a concept called Daka, taken from the sound of automatic weapon fire, that means a number of things to orcs, but generally, the more Daka a weapon has, the better. The loudest and heaviest gun that has the most Daka is therefore the best one, and that really sums up just about all orc culture. In this video, we'll take a brief look at many of the various weapons of war that orcs possess, even if there's really no limit to the ways that orcs can come up with to spread their love of bullets and bombs. To begin with, it's impossible to discuss orc weaponry without discussing how exactly they function at all. Orc weaponry, vehicles, and equipment are pretty much always cobbled together from various other bits into crude looking forms that appear on the surface to be barely, if at all, functional. What allows these pieces of text to function is a psychic field innately generated by orcs, which grows more potent the more orcs there are in one place. To put it plainly, orc technology functions, in part, because they believe it will function, and this concept extends throughout their entire culture. Because they believe that red things go faster than other things, they often will paint their vehicles red, making them actually go faster. In combination with this, orc equipment isn't mass produced in factories the same way it is for more civilized factions, and an orc will often customize their weapon in extensive ways, so no two orc guns will ever look identical. What we're left with then is a series of categories more than specific weapon types, but any given weapon in each category will serve somewhat of the same purpose as another. Let's start with orc melee weapons, a quite broad category generally known as choppas, or big choppas if it's a larger version requiring both hands to wield. Choppas consist of smaller and larger swords, daggers, and axes, although really most of them are little more than Lion L. Johnson, the First. Despite being genetically modified creatures born of advanced science and warp manipulation, the Primarchs are often surprising in how human they remain. They experience doubt, paranoia, and confusion, and they're certainly not immune to making mistakes. They often squabbled amongst each other during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, and many of them became corrupted by chaos, just as any normal man could be. Lion L. Johnson is among the greatest of the Loyalist Primarchs, renowned for his ability in battle and his strategic mind. But he also has a history of making simple errors in social situations that a more socially conscious human would easily avoid. Lion's upbringing, like most of the Primarchs, was extremely formative on his personality, and he remains one of the more solitary Primarchs because of it. Let's take a brief look at that upbringing, as well as Lion's time during the Heresy and afterwards. Like all of his brother Primarchs, Lion was separated at birth from his father, the Emperor of Mankind, and spirited away to a distant planet. Lion, in particular, ended up on a planet named Caliban, which, due to its proximity to the massive warp rift known as the Eye of Terror, it had been corrupted by the forces of chaos over the millennia. The planet was coated in dark, twisted forests, filled with horrific creatures known as the Great Beasts that had been mutated by the warp into fanatical and deadly predators. The inhospitable nature of the planet earned it the classification of a death world by Imperial astrocartographers, meaning that it wasn't fit for widespread human settlement. Despite this, humans did live here, albeit not in the forests, but rather in large fortresses and castles located in clearings that had been hacked clear from the forest. It was said that Caliban possessed a vicious intelligence that extended to its forests and wildlife, which was in constant conflict with the humans here. The government here on Caliban was a feudal one, with the ruling class made up of great warriors raised to survive against the deadly threats of the forests. The people here were not technologically advanced by any means, but they did possess some fragments of the legendary standard template construct systems from humanity's past, and so they did have some advanced weapons and armor available to them. They were able to produce rudimentary bolt pistols, chain swords, energy weapons, and even power armor, which would all prove vital in their constant battles against the great beasts, although they possessed little other technology, riding into battle on great war horses, for example. The knights that ruled Caliban were all that prevented the human population on the planet from being wiped out by the great beasts. And so it was here that Lion landed, deep in the dark and dangerous forests, forced to survive entirely on his own. How many years Lion lived out there in the wild, surrounded by ferocious monsters, is unknown, as he speaks little of those times himself, but some estimate that it was only a decade or less, while local legends imply that he was out there for far longer, perhaps as long as a century. Time is a fluid thing in the 40K universe, however, so it's entirely unclear. Regardless, it was those dark forests of Caliban that forged Lion into the man he would become. Quiet, calculating, determined, akin in many ways to the great beasts that surrounded him, but also greater than any of them. After so many years of isolation and deadly survival, however, Lion was eventually discovered by a group of knights. Initially, they judged him to be so dangerous that it would be best to simply slay him like any other great beast, but one among them thought differently. This man, named Luther, saw the potential in him, and so brought him back to civilization, naming him Lion L. Johnson, meaning the lion, son of the forest. Luther was the leader of a knightly group called the Order, known for their honesty, nobility, and fearlessness, with Luther being regarded as the greatest hero on Caliban. Luther proceeded to have Lion raised as a knight of the Order, teaching him to live as a man rather than as a beast, and Lion quickly adapted to living among humans, soon mastering everything his tutors could teach. Before long, he rose to the highest ranks of the Order, where he made clear his goal: to launch a crusade to exterminate every last great beast on Caliban, so that the people here could finally know peace. The Knights of Caliban would likely have scoffed at the notion coming from a lesser man, but Lion, like practically all the Primarchs, inspired greatness, and so their crusade began. Lion's intelligence, might, confidence, and determination drew record numbers of recruits to the Order, and the bloody battles continued on for a decade, with hundreds of knights lost for every nest they managed to destroy. They would have likely given up swiftly, if not for the resolute determination of Lion, who knew that leaving the task unfinished would be to waste all of the lives spent so far. Eventually, the crusade was a success, and Lion was bestowed the title of Grand Master of the Order, surpassing his adoptive father and mentor, Luther. Lion accepted the title, but still didn't understand the value that others placed on titles and rewards, and he failed to notice the effect his success had had on Luther. Luther was an exceptional man, the greatest among the natives of Caliban, but no man can stand against the glories of the Primarchs, so Luther was forced to live in Lion's shadow, and a wound began to fester. After his victory, Lion demanded fealty from all the other knightly orders, uniting Caliban under one banner, and shortly after, the Emperor arrived on Caliban after hearing word that a Primarch was here. Although Lion was not the first Primarch to be found during the Great Crusade, he was given command of the first Space Marine Legion to be created, as they were created from his gene seed. The legion that was given to Lion was beset by strife, having suffered greatly in a series of reckless campaigns, and they were filled with pride and vanity. To test them, Lion dueled one of the captains, despite the captain wearing Terminator armor and Lion merely clad in Calibanite steel. Of course, Lion won the duel, but in the process, both Primarch and Legion learned some respect for the other. Lion proceeded to rename the Legion the Dark Angels, after an old Caliban myth, and had Luther and other members of the order go through trials to see if they were worthy to join the Legion. If they passed, the young would be formed into fully fledged Astartes, while the older ones would be genetically modified to enhance their abilities as much as possible. Luther was one of these that was genetically modified, and became Lion's second in command as they joined the Great Crusade. Due to being regarded as the first of the Primarchs, Lion was given the first Gloriana-class battleship, the largest in the Imperial fleets, named the Invincible Reason. Caliban, meanwhile, was transformed by the might of Imperial industry, swiftly turning from a planet covered in sprawling wilderness to one covered in sprawling manufactories and refineries. The population of the planet were quickly converted into useful tools for the Crusade, either as laborers or as soldiers. Lion soon met with his brother Primarchs, and came to be regarded as dour and morose, with his inclination towards solitude and his way of seeing things in a stark way alienating him somewhat from the others. His perspective of the great beasts on Caliban being merely enemies of mankind that needed to be destroyed extended to the Great Crusade, and while his troubling formative years on Caliban had made him aloof and distrusting of others, very few among his brothers could hope to match his strategic brilliance. One of the first things that Lion did as the leader of the Dark Angels was to seek out all of the scattered companies of his legion, reuniting them. To do so, he proceeded to duel the captain of every company he encountered, and within only a few short years, he had gathered 100,000 Space Marines in his legion. One of the first major conflicts that Lion and the Dark Angels took part in were the Rangdan Xenocides, a massive series of campaigns against a vicious species of Xenos known as the Rangdan. Over the course of the campaign, 80,000 Astartes gave their lives, along with millions of the Imperial army, and the Dark Angels took perhaps the most grievous losses of the legions involved. During this time, their numbers were eclipsed by the Ultramarines, Iron Hands, and the Sons of Horus, and so they also slipped in prominence among the legions. Eventually, the Emperor of Mankind decided that he needed to appoint one of his sons as the War Master for the Great Crusade, to lead it in his stead. While Lion's leadership ability and combat prowess were legendary, his personality made him ill-suited for the role, being too secretive and stoic. Instead, Horus was appointed as War Master, with Lion accepting the appointment as being the final sign that Horus was the Emperor's favorite son. Later, the Dark Angels participated in the continued compliance of a planet called Sarash, which had expressed interest in joining the Imperium, but continued to delay their full compliance, blaming it on their bureaucracy. Secretly, however, they worshipped chaos entities in the warp, and saw the anti-religious stance of the Imperial Truth as evil. When Lion and the Dark Angels arrived to accelerate the compliance process, the leader of the Sarasi bureaucracy was invited aboard the Invincible Reason to meet the Primarch. However, upon doing so, he denounced both Lion and the Emperor to the Primarch's face, at which point Lion rammed his power sword through the man's body. This wasn't their whole plan, however, as they had also snuck aboard a nuclear weapon, intending to assassinate Lion and the entire command structure of the fleet. This was prevented by Luther and a junior librarian, who managed to eject the weapon into space, where it detonated and caused only minor damage. Unfortunately, Luther admitted to the librarian that he had actually discovered the nuke earlier, but he had briefly hesitated to do something about it due to the jealousy for Lion that had been growing inside of him. Somehow, Lion discovered this fact, and in response, although it wasn't outright stated to be a punishment, Luther and a number of legionnaires from Caliban were sent back to their homeworld. Ostensibly, this was to accelerate the recruitment of new Dark Angels, but Luther felt that he and the others had been exiled, especially as he had also been scolded by Lion for a mistake he made during another campaign. This only served to continue to build Luther's resentment towards Lion, although his social ineptitude prevented him from noticing it. One of the most notable situations that Lion was involved in during the Great Crusade was the Dulin campaign, where the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves joined forces to assault the rebel planet of Dulin. The leadership here had not only disrespected the Emperor, but had also insulted the Primarch of the Space Wolves, Leman Russ, directly, naming him the Emperor's lapdog. In response, Russ swore that he would cut the rebel leader's head from his shoulders himself, and demanded that he be allowed to immediately attack the headquarters. Lion, however, refused the request, as he had a detailed plan in motion to assault the headquarters with minimal casualties on their side. He did, however, agree that Russ would be the one to enter and slay the rebel leader. Later, though, Russ was preoccupied with other things when the time came to slay the leader, so Lion went in himself and killed him. Afterwards, Russ stormed into the headquarters, and, infuriated at the sight of the man's head in the Lion's hand, Russ punched his brother. The two proceeded to fight one another, first with weapons, then unarmed, until they finally broke apart. Russ began to laugh at the absurdity of the situation, but Lion was not amused, and so he punched his brother unconscious while he was laughing. When Russ eventually awoke, Lion had departed the planet, and he later stated that if he had not left then, he believed he would have killed Russ. Afterwards, it became a ritual between the Dark Angels and Space Wolves to have honor duels between one another whenever their legions met. Eventually, the Horus Heresy arrived, and Lion knew that if Horus was to triumph, he'd need to eventually confront the Emperor at Terra. He also knew that sieging Terra would require immense ordnance, and happened to have learned about some highly powerful siege weapons located on the Forge world of Diamat. Lion knew that Horus would be coming for these weapons, so he instead led a small force there to secure them first. He and his forces arrived at Diamat outnumbered by traitorous forces, but managed to prevail largely thanks to Lion's tactical prowess. Afterwards, his brother Perturabo and the Iron Warriors arrived, on their way to join Ferrus Manus in confronting Horus at Istvan V. Lion's plan was to rejoin his legion and head for Terra, but he confessed to Perturabo that he hoped to become the new War Master after Horus's defeat, as he believed that had he been the first Primarch found, instead of Horus, he would be the Emperor's favorite. In order to gain Perturabo's support for his bid to become the new War Master, Lion unfortunately gave him the siege weapons, not knowing that Perturabo was on Horus's side. Later, as Lion hoped to make a push back to Terra, Horus dispatched Conrad Kurz and his Night Lords to the eastern fringes of the Imperium to launch a campaign of terror and genocide in order to distract the Angels. What followed was 3 years of slaughter and battles between the Dark Angels and the Night Lords, with Lion and Kurz eventually meeting in person. Kurz revealed a dark prophecy to Lion about the future of his legion, and soon Kurz slandered him, so in return, he struck Conrad and a fight began. During the duel, Lion's throat was slashed, and he would have likely been killed had not one of his honor guards ran their sword through Conrad's spine. Both Primarchs were dragged away from each other as their legions battled it out, but this wouldn't be the last time Lion and Kurz would fight. Afterwards, Lion managed to recover an ancient artifact created by the Old Ones, capable of performing extremely efficient and precise warp jumps. While utilizing the device to travel through the warp to ambush Kurz, Lion would encounter Kairos Fateweaver, the vizier of Tzeentch. Kairos attempted to convert Lion to chaos, but found nothing in his heart to sway him, finding him to be absolutely loyal to the Emperor and viewing loyalty as its own reward. In response, Lion impaled Kairos through the heart and asked if he saw that coming. Using the warp artifact, Lion and the Dark Angels ambush Curze and the Night Lords, leaving Curze in a comatose state. They would then afterwards launch a second ambush, but in the process, Curze awoke and boarded the Invincible Reason with several troops. Curze proceeded to disappear into the bowels of the ship, killing every search team Lion sent after him, and managing to evade Lion himself for the next 16 weeks. During this time, Lorgar and the Word Bearers had engineered a massive warp storm, cutting off a large sector of Imperial space from Terra. Lion joined up with Roboute Guilliman and Sanguinius to participate in the formation of the Imperium Secundus on the ultramarine homeworld of Macragge, in case Terra had already fallen. While on Macragge, Curze left the Invincible Reason and rampaged across the planet, so Lion and Guilliman worked together to try and take down their traitorous brother. Unfortunately, Curze led them right into a trap, which they barely managed to survive. Lion felt responsible for Curze's rampages, so he continued to obsessively hunt after him. He was convinced that the recent rebellions on Macragge were due to Curze influencing them, so he used the Dark Angels to establish martial law across the planet without consulting Guilliman about it. Eventually, though, Lion managed to corner Curze, and the two fought once more, with Lion emerging the victor. Instead of killing his brother, though, he snapped his spine and brought him before Sanguinius and Guilliman to stand trial. During the trial, Curze worked to pit Lion against Guilliman, until eventually Lion moved to kill Curze, but was stopped by his two brothers. Sanguinius proceeded to dismiss Lion from the triumvirate, and so he and the Dark Angels quickly left. Shortly after, he utilized the warp device to teleport into Sanguinius's chambers, telling his brothers that Curze claimed his death would eventually come at the hands of an assassin sent by the Emperor, meaning that the Emperor had to still be alive. They needed to work together to breach the Ruin Storm and reach Terra, and the others agreed, with Curze being taken as a captive aboard the Invincible Reason. Unfortunately, not even Lion's legendary warp artifact could break through the Ruin Storm, so they had to find another way to get through. During the process, Sanguinius realized that he needed to go to where the Horus Heresy began, Davin, despite his two brothers both believing that the world should just be destroyed outright. When they arrived at Davin, Sanguinius shocked Lion by boarding the Invincible Reason and taking Curze with him, hoping to use his prophetic abilities to help him understand what he was meant to do here. Sanguinius then ordered a mass ground assault of the planet, and Lion was so enraged by the proceedings that he nearly ordered an exterminatus on the planet, regardless of his brother's presence on it. At the last moment, however, he relented, and was immediately horrified by what he had nearly done, realizing that some external force was affecting them. He and Guilliman proceeded to join Sanguinius on the surface, and together they managed to destroy a massive demon engine, creating a hole in the Ruin Storm that led to Terra. Unfortunately, it was being blockaded by a gauntlet of traitor fleets, so Lion and Guilliman agreed to run interference, while Sanguinius and the Blood Angels made directly for Terra. Rather than heading for Terra himself, however, Lion expressed a desire to continue to distract the enemy by attacking worlds that Horus had captured along his way to Terra. At some point during this, the Astronomicon, in the Dark Angel's fleet, the psychic beacon that guides Imperial ships through the warp, went dark. Fearing the worst, Lion became nihilistic, pledging to burn as much of the traitor's territory as he could. He proceeded to oversee the destruction of both Chemos and Barbarous, the homeworlds of Fulgrim and Mortarion respectively, using the warp artifact for guidance. He eventually did make course for Terra, but was too late to influence the battle, and was ultimately racked with grief. In the wake of the Horus Heresy, he returned to Caliban to recover and reinforce the Dark Angels. When they arrived, however, his fleet was immediately struck by a salvo of fire from the surface, forcing them to pull back. Lion soon learned that Luther had poisoned the minds of the Space Marines here and taken control of the planet. Failing to see the development of Luther's animosity towards him up to this point, Lion now saw this as the taint of chaos, working its corruption on his former mentor. He let loose his fury, bombarding the planet from orbit to utterly rid the world of chaos. The planet burned and cracked, its defenses whittled down to nothing as Lion led his forces into the Order's fortress monastery where Luther waited. Here he found nothing of his former friend, as Luther had been elevated by the Chaos Gods to be equal in strength to Lion, and the two engaged in combat. During the course of their battle, they leveled the monastery around them as the orbital bombardment continued. Eventually, Luther managed to mortally wound Lion with a massive psychic attack, and afterwards realized what he had done, as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. He fell to the floor as a massive warp storm ripped the planet apart. In the aftermath, all that remained was the ruins of the monastery, protected by vast force fields. Here, the Dark Angels found Luther, mumbling that Lion had been taken by the Watchers in the Dark, native creatures of Caliban that possess an extremely rare ability to resist the warp and have been known to assist the Dark Angels. Luther claimed that Lion El'Jonson would return one day and forgive him for his sins, and the Dark Angels could find no trace of their Primarch. The asteroid containing the monastery was converted into a massive ship known as the Rock to function as the Dark Angels' fortress monastery. The Dark Angels that had been converted by Luther had been sucked into the warp during the destruction of Caliban and were scattered across the galaxy. They became known as the Fallen, with many of them joining the forces of Chaos, while others operated as pirates or warlords, with a small number of them coming to regret their heresy and living lives of peaceful seclusion. The ones that managed to be captured by the Dark Angels are held deep within the Rock, alongside Luther, who has been kept alive there for over 10,000 years, as he rants and raves that Lion will soon return and absolve him of his sins. However, the true secret of the Rock, known only to the Watchers of the Dark and the Emperor, is that Lion's body is held at the heart of the ship, guarded by the Watchers. In the 42nd millennium, in the wake of the Great Rift that segregated the Imperium, Lion finally awoke, but found himself in a mysterious wooded realm reminiscent of his homeworld, without his memories. Here, he encountered an old, wounded king, slowly bleeding from his injuries, and who is stalked by hungering shadows. Though he wishes to talk, the king cannot, and can only stare. The Watchers in the Dark are here as well, and tell Lion that the king can answer questions, but only if the right one is asked. They also say that the shadows near the king can be a threat to anyone who gains their attention, but they will never wander far from the old king's side. They tell Lion to follow his nature here, simply referring to the place as home, which leads him to following a stench of corruption. While following it, Lion suddenly found himself physically on the heavily forested planet of Kamarth, controlled by a warband of fallen space marines. He soon met with one of the fallen, Zabriel, who remained loyal to the Imperium, and who wished to help Lion rid the planet of the traitorous fallen. With that, Zabriel became the first of the Risen, and with the aid of the surviving population, they were able to liberate Kamarth. Lion's memories returned to him, and he proceeded to continue to gather loyalist forces, expanding the number of the Risen, as he reclaimed more and more planets as part of a region that became known as the Lion's Protectorate. During this time, Lion continued to be able to enter the mysterious forested realm, which he believed to be adjacent to the warp. Here, there was a domed building that the Watchers initially warned him against entering, but when he finally did so, he found a demon capable of shape-shifting into the forms of the other Primarchs. He was losing his fight with the creature until he managed to find a shield within the building, with it turning out to be originally the Emperor's personal shield. Using it, he was able to destroy the demon, and also eventually found a legendary power sword known as Fealty. Lion continued to use his ability to enter the realm, known as forest walking, to cross great distances in a short amount of time, and can even allow him to bring others with him. Curiously, the locations that the Forest Walk takes him to always contain more of the Fallen, which has allowed him to gather a great number of them. Later, on a corrupted section of Caliban known as Wormwood, Lion fought against the demon Primarch Angron, managing to defeat him with both the Emperor's Shield and Fealty, earning him the title of the Knight of Nihilus. Now, Lion continues his bloody war against the enemies of the Imperium, forever loyal to the Emperor. Lion El'Jonson is not an especially complicated man. His upbringing, both in the wilds of Caliban by himself, as well as being raised by a knightly order, dictated much of what his personality and code of conduct would become. He keeps his own counsel much of the time, just as the Emperor often did, and is aloof in personal social situations, but he is also inspiring, honorable, and loyal. Luther actually did much of the heavy lifting in social situations for him, so when he was sent away, Lion became more paranoid and inept. There are certainly reasons that he didn't quite fit in with any of his other brothers, as the scenario with Leman Russ aptly demonstrates, but the fact that even the forces of chaos know that he'll never betray the Emperor is a critical part of who he is. Perhaps had he actually been found first among the Primarchs, instead of Horus, much of history would have been different. But at least he's still alive, and still serving the Emperor. Armaments of the Imperium. Warhammer 40k has a lot going on in it, between the various different species and factions, the large number of branches of the Imperial government and military, the Primarchs, the Emperor, mutants, Psykers, Chaos Gods, and so on and so forth. More important than perhaps any of that, however, at least as far as the actual war in Warhammer goes, are the weapons, equipment, and tools that all of these factions utilize while on the battlefield. The Imperial Guard, the Navy, the Mechanicus, the Sisters of Battle, and the Astartes all use a wide variety of armaments to wage war, in a constant race against death from all of the other factions. The Imperium has the most relatable set of armaments for us, largely consisting of rifles, cannons, machine guns, grenades, and so on. But in 40,000 years of battling, they've come up with some pretty cool toys. This will just serve as a small summary of many of the different weapons available to the Imperium, as an exhaustive list would be quite time-consuming. Let's start with the weapons used by the Imperial Guard, the rank-and-file soldiers of the Imperium numbering in the countless billions that largely rely on strength of numbers over anything else. While ranged weaponry is of course the preferred way of waging war, there are a handful of close-quarters weapons utilized by the Guard. All Imperial Guardsmen are issued either a trench knife or a bayonet in case of dire circumstances, with some regiments particularly excelling in close quarters, such as the Catachan Jungle Fighters. Officers of the Imperial Guard, however, are often given more impressive melee weapons, including chainswords and power swords, or other power weapons. Chainswords are pretty much what the name implies, a sword with powered teeth, capable of biting and tearing through flesh, bone, and armor. Power weapons, however, most commonly utilize a metal blade or head, which is then sheathed in a corona of disruptive energy that can break the molecular bonds of matter that it strikes. Obviously, these are incredibly impressive weapons and are quite rare, so they're only usually given to the Astartes, Inquisitors, and high-ranking officers. The standard issue ranged weapon for all Imperial Guardsmen is the las gun, or las rifle. These weapons are reliable, easy to both produce and maintain, and easily resupplied, requiring only a power cell and no solid ammunition. Laser weapons are accurate, with no physical projectile, although the beam can be diffused by heavy particles in the air and dissipates over long distances. The basic lasgun is not an incredibly powerful weapon by 40k standards, but it can easily tear through lightly armored personnel, and very little can stand up for long against a barrage of millions of lasguns firing in unison. The Hellgun is a more powerful version of the lasgun, powered by an external energy pack for increased armor piercing. These are considerably more expensive to produce, so they are mainly utilized by the Guard's elite troops, the Stormtroopers. Las pistols and Hell pistols also exist, generally favored by officers as a sidearm to their chainswords, with shorter range and profile. The Las cannon is the most powerful of the laser weapons utilized by the Guard, either mounted onto a vehicle or carried by a two-man fire team, and is mainly used as an anti-tank weapon. Plasma guns are occasionally wielded by Imperial Guardsmen and Stormtroopers, although while they are far more powerful than las guns, they are far more unstable, with the risk of malfunctioning and even exploding in the wielder's hands being a concern. They contain a miniature fusion core that uses liquid hydrogen fuel to energize plasma enough to eject it via a magnetic accelerator. Meltaguns, on the other hand, also use plasma, but are more stable in their design, firing a blast of plasma heated to tens of thousands of degrees, capable of melting through almost any material. These are the primary ways in which the Guard and the Astartes deal with enemy armor, but the major drawback is the range, so they are often utilized by specialized tank hunting squads that have to get in close to do a targeted attack. The Flamer is another heat-based weapon used by the Guard, akin to a flamethrower, that fires liquid promethium, which ignites upon contact with the air. These are primarily used against lightly armored and closely packed troops, with the heavy flamer being a more powerful version, usually mounted on vehicles, although some regiments also use these in two-man teams. Another weapon used by two-man teams of the Guard are the missile launchers, which are exactly what it says on the tin. These are armed with either frag or crack missiles, the first of which explode in a large blast wave useful for groups of lightly armored infantry, while crack missiles concentrate the explosion in a much smaller radius, making them useful for taking out enemy vehicles. Frag and crack grenades are also standard issue for Guardsmen, with the standard infantry given frag grenades and stormtroopers and veterans given crack grenades. Melta bombs are large grenades based on the same technology as Melta guns, useful for neutralizing heavy armor or fortified positions, while forward scouts will often carry snare mines, shaped explosive charges designed for ambushes. While there exists a number of other weapons utilized by the Guardsmen across the galaxy, and countless variations on every weapon for different regiments, by and large, the standard lasgun is the weapon most closely associated with the Astra Militarum and the general workhorse of the Imperium. As for their vehicles, the Imperial Guard fields a wide variety of them, from artillery tanks to armored personnel carriers to various forms of light and heavy tanks. The Chimera is their standard personnel carrier and forms the basis for a large number of other armored vehicles they utilize. The basic Chimera is equipped with a rapid-fire heavy laser weapon, as well as a mounted heavy bolter or heavy flamer, and 6 mounted lasguns on the flanks that allow the infantry inside to fire upon the enemy during transport. Variants based on the Chimera chassis include the Salamander, a lightly armored scout vehicle equipped with an autocannon or a heavy flamer, and the Basilisk, the Guard's most common artillery tank, which are equipped with the Earthshaker cannon, the Guard's longest range weapon. The Guard's primary battle tank is the Leman Russ, named after the Primarch, the standard weaponry of which is a battle cannon mounted in the turret and usually heavy bolters on the sides and front. The Leman Russ is similar to many tanks of our modern era, being cramped inside, loud, and with thinner armor in the rear, but its versatility, ease of construction, and firepower make it a staple of the Guard's tactics. The Imperial Guard do not possess any aircraft, as all Imperial space and aircraft fall under the purview of the Imperial Navy, aside from a few small exceptions. Moving on to the Navy then, they also command a large variety of spaceships and aircraft, from the largest of the battleships to the smallest of the attack craft. A separate video could easily be made just covering the main starships of the Navy, so for now we'll just cover the broad points. Battleships are the largest ships the Navy utilizes, with sizes varying wildly depending on the ship and the source. Some battleships possess crews of 3 million men alone, while others only have a relatively small crew of 25,000. They are generally 6 to 8 kilometers in length, although some easily double those numbers, with the Gloriana-class battleships created during the Great Crusade being over 20 kilometers long. Battleships are cumbersome to maneuver, expensive to produce, and costly to maintain, but their capacity and firepower is second to none within the Navy. Grand cruisers are the next step down, although these are of older designs and are in the process of being phased out. Cruisers, then, the next size down, make up the majority of the Navy's fleets, being faster than a battleship while still capable of dishing out tremendous amounts of firepower. Variations exist for these, like all weapons and vehicles of the Imperium, with some cruisers possessing more fighter bays than others, while another might be more defensible or possess longer range weaponry. Light cruisers also exist, being even faster and more maneuverable, often used for reconnaissance and patrols. Escorts are the smallest type of warship the Navy possesses, with the two common subclasses being frigates and destroyers. Frigates are larger, better armed, and more heavily armored, while destroyers are the fastest interstellar warships the Navy has. Escorts are generally organized in squadrons of 2 to 6 vessels, serving as a screen for larger ships against enemy torpedoes and attack craft, or to finish off enemy cruisers that have been damaged. Of course, the Navy has their own attack craft, small ships with a crew of 1 to 3 individuals. The Fury Interceptor is their most common starfighter, being generally under 70 meters long and having a 3-man crew of pilot, navigator, and gunner. These are normally equipped with forward-firing banks of las cannons and missiles, and are often accompanied by Starhawks, which carry plasma bombs and armor-piercing missiles for use against capital ships. In atmosphere, the Navy fields 4 types of ships most commonly, starting with the Lightning and Thunderbolt, their strike fighter and heavy fighter respectively. Lightnings are fast, lightly armored planes used for reconnaissance and interception, while Thunderbolts are the primary means by which the Navy controls the skies above a planet, equipped with 2 sets of twin-linked autocannons and a set of twin-linked las cannons, as well as a loadout of tactical bombs, air-to-surface Hellstrike missiles, or air-to-air Sky Strike missiles. To support the Guard, they also commonly field Valkyrie transport ships and Vulture gunships, with the Valkyrie being more focused on moving troops quickly, while the Vulture provides heavy fire support. Vultures can be equipped with a vast amount of weaponry, including heavy bolters, twin-linked multi-lasers, Hellstrike missiles, las cannons, and Punisher Gatling cannons. Valkyries, on the other hand, are more commonly equipped with just a multi-laser, a couple of manned heavy bolters, and a couple of Hellstrike missiles, but its maneuverability and Lyon L. Johnson, the First.